Eystein Veflingstad, welcome to the Map It Forward podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Before we deep dive into the conversation, why don't you tell everybody about you, where you're at? Because most people are going to be listening to your name and be quite confused about actually where you're at. And judging by the beating in the background, if anyone's ever watched the news about where you're at, they'll understand why that sound is happening. So go ahead.
So let's just hope I don't get too language confused because I don't speak English that much these days. So my name is Eystein. I'm a Norwegian and I live in Brazil. I've been here for a little bit over 7 years now. And I've been in the coffee industry since '99. Working my way through barista, manager, managed to head up a roast works when I was quite young. And then almost 8 years ago, this opportunity to go to Brazil came at me, and why not? What's a better place for a coffee professional? Being in a big city with lots of money and an ordered culture, or living a little bit differently in a country where it's actually good to be human and you're allowed to be human. You're not just function.
And where they bang on saucepans. Coffee. Right. Mm-hmm. And they bang on saucepans at around this time of the evening. So why don't you explain what's going on in the background so that people aren't that confused?
Well, Brazil is pretty heavily populated, and there's quite a lot of people living in this city as well. I live in Belo Horizonte, which means a beautiful horizon. Mountainous city in the interior of Minas, the biggest coffee producer here in Brazil, about 48 to 55%, depending on the year of the total production of Brazil. So it's a good place to be for a professional. So since I had all the extraction side and I had the roasting side with me when I came, I focused on those two things. And what I do here is try to guide roastworks and guide principally producers in how to taste your coffees and how to let the coffees tell them what they need to do. So that's a short version of what I do today.
Great. Awesome. So what do you attribute taking you to Brazil? Like, was it, I got to go where the cool people are, I got to go where the cool coffee is, I got to get out of my comfort zone? As a human who has challenged herself to do the challenging things in life quite a number of times, and I head towards hard things, was this one of those things, or was it just an opportunity?
Well, it was an opportunity, but it was kind of like a two-pronged opportunity because I was married to a Brazilian at the time, and she wanted very much to go home and see what life had to offer here. Life in Northern Europe, life in most of Europe for immigrants is not that easy. So I've been able to study that up close for many, many years. So it's good to be on the other side. So she wanted to go home. I was kind of banging my head on the wall trying to figure out what to do because it was difficult for me to advance as a professional from the level I was at the time. Very few people to look at, very few things to do better within the technology that we had and the coffees that we had. So going to Brazil seemed like the perfect answer. So that's the two-sided one. So wife wanted to go home, and I really needed a change, and I really needed to grow as a professional, to be able to offer something more back to the community.
Was it what you expected?
It will, I had already been to Brazil for quite a few visits over a lot of years. I think my first visit was back in 2005. So I've seen Brazil change and grow over time, which is interesting. And it's very different today than what it was a short time ago. People who remember 20, 30 years ago remember something completely different. So it's a country in a lot of change. It's a country that's living, even though we have financial difficulties, we're living within a bit of a financial boom where everyone has more access to technology, and by this, they can study better. So I have great hopes for where we're going because, yes, the internet can disinform you in a very bad way. But if you know how to look and you know how to filter, you can actually be a great help. So I'm hoping that communication flow today will help things move even faster so we can get to a more humane place soon.
You sound very hopeful. You sound much more hopeful than I do. I think the world's in a very interesting place, yes. But I don't know that we're done with, if we're going to use the word interesting, I don't think we're done with seeing how interesting it's going to be yet.
No, politics or climate.
You know, I'm going down these rabbit holes at the moment where I'm trying to understand how information is exchanged. And I'm trying to understand the percentage of bots that are on the internet that are, or in specific social media ecosystems, so that I can kind of figure out like how much I'm being lied to and how much disinformation there is out there. And as a critical thinker, data is important. But what's more important than data is the quality of the data. And right now, I'm not seeing any quality data out there about very much at all. And so it kind of leaves me a little disenfranchised about what the definition of truth is right now.
I was writing about that the other day, doing some notes for one of my courses, and one of the things we need to really look at when we're doing research. I'm not a professional doing this. I'm not schooled for doing this. I just do this because I have the sensory ability and the baggage that I need to be able to do evaluations the way I do. But we also need to be aware of the error factor, or the plain fact that we can just be wrong, even though there are many pointers saying that, all my research so far shows that, but it could mean nothing.
It's really interesting this discussion is going in this direction, because when we talk about truth, a lot of the time when I'm researching politics or I'm researching a bunch of other things for one of my other podcasts, I bring it back to truth and the coffee industry and sensory experiences, and the different sensory experiences that two people can have and both believe that theirs is the truth. And will argue to the death, so to speak, that their experience is the more correct one because it's their truth. And so when you start talking to people about, well, how about the fact that taste is subjective? And that if you haven't gone through the process of calibrating both palates with each other, you're speaking kind of untethered. And that's not a great perspective to approach the truth from. If you haven't understood and calibrated each other's sensory perspective, well, you're kind of shooting in the dark then, aren't you? Most people get very uncomfortable with that conversation.
I'd like to open it up even more, if I may.
Please do.
I think that, first of all, I don't have religion, but I have great respect for faith, because that's something that happens inside human beings, and that's part of our reality. And where I want to get to is that the only reality for me is all the stuff I'm processing from my eyes, my ears, my tongue, and my skin, and everything else. And that's the only real reality for me. Yes, I know there's stuff out there, but everything is subject to my interpretation, whether it's right or wrong. But it's still my reality, and nobody can deny that. So you can open it up that way, which I like to do, and which I do. And you can also go the other way and say that and it's not about indoctrination or right or wrong, but when you're talking about flavor and aroma, you have to remember that human beings have been here for a long time, and we knew what to eat and how to eat before we knew how to write and transfer information. So what we have, what we live in, what we are in part, this is a fantastic instrument for you to analyze whatever you put into your mouth. And you can, for example, the way you salivate can tell you what kind of acid you're tasting, or what family of acid, to call it something. If it's citric or malic or tartaric or whatever, the way you salivate, the speed and the flow rate that you get can actually tell you what you're tasting. So the human body is a fantastic instrument for this, and the best indicator inside of human nutrition, if you look at fruits in particular, we don't judge them based on their sugar content. We judge them based on their acidity, because acidity is the real marker of, is the seed ready? The fruit and the seed become ready at the same moment, more or less. The fruit to be eaten and the seed to be transported. Very simple. So, we have all these reactions that if we stop and think and feel, we might be able to feel how the body is receiving whatever we're eating or drinking. And I want coffee to become a beautiful lie, where you're not getting all that wonderful nutrition that your body is thinking that it's getting, but you're managing to fool it on all levels. So you're basically taking coffee to a new level, where you're not just making coffee, but you're also making coffee for the unconscious or the subconscious. You're taking the body with you on the journey, and enforcing that euphoric feeling that caffeine gives you. But usually it's kind of trumped out by your need for water, for example. So you should prepare before you drink coffee. You need to fill up with water, and you'll feel less anxiety, for example. So, there are many, many things that happen that can guide us, and especially guide coffee producers.
So what are you working on right now?
What I'm working on right now is a new line of courses, where I've kind of rewritten the timeline on what is important. And I've focused it in, I think it's 5 different groups. So one is sensory, where I have sensory for producers, sensory for roasters, and sensory for baristas. And they all have different focus. For example, sensory for baristas is based on finding the right grind. But how to find the right grind? What are the flavor characteristics of a grind that's too fine? What are the characteristics of a grind that's too coarse? And how to fine tune and how to adjust your extraction for the results that you need. Because you can, even though you don't change the grind, for example, you can put emphasis or de-emphasize chocolate. You can clean up and make more complex and maybe a bit more dirty a fruity coffee. There are a lot of things you can do, and you can do this in all stages. You can do this through picking, through fermentation, drying, roasting, all the way to actually making coffee for consumption.
In our email exchange of a couple of weeks ago, and just for clarity, Eystein and I met at the Global Coffee Town Hall. That was in Portuguese. That was the first time that we met. And soon after that, I kind of reached out, and actually during the town hall, I reached out to you and said, you need to come on my podcast, even though I did not understand a single thing that you were saying. But the beautiful Kelly Stein and Felipe Croce both were interpreting to me through the chat. And I'm like, I got to get Eystein on the podcast. And in the email exchange that followed after that, you said something that was really very interesting. It was this idea that there's a disconnect between what the producer is producing coffee for and what the roaster is roasting coffee for.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
That's probably my favorite subject, because it's more or less the goal of my life to look at this and address this. So in my mind, I'm living in a society right now where my vision of what is fourth wave coffee is happening. To me, fourth wave is closing the circle, just like we have with wine. A finished product can leave the vineyard, or with tea, where a finished product that you just need to, you add water at a certain temperature and boom, you're good to go. It's very simple. Of course, tea is more complex as well when you go into it with a lot of detail. But coffee is absurdly complex, and the coffee chain has a huge problem, and that is difficult to communicate directly between who makes the coffee and who roasts the coffee. There are knowledge gaps, there are language gaps. Sometimes it isn't important. One of the funniest for me at the moment is all the demand for coffees with processes that don't exist or wouldn't work, or they're just plain wrong. For example, I don't know. Focus on anaerobic fermentations, for example, seeing that most of the fermentations that we actually like in coffee don't even work with oxygen until they go too far and start, making stuff rotten and bad. Kind of think it's funny. It's kind of a disservice to the farmers who are trying to make something that doesn't exist. And maybe that if it was presented with more knowledge and more intelligence, maybe things would move faster at origin where it needs to move faster, because we need to strengthen the chain, and to strengthen the chain we need to start working at the base. Yes, we have to have our leaders, and we have to have our scientists, and we have to have our financial institutions, and we need schools and all these things. But we need to strengthen the base, and we need to get good information to the people who really need it. And the people who really need it and who have the potential to make coffee very different from what it is today are the farmers. So they need just, better ways of doing things, more economic ways of doing things, knowing in which areas of their processes they need to make simple changes to get better coffees, more clean coffees. I know that a lot of work has been done in Brazil over the last 20 years, trying to avoid fermentation in coffee, because that makes one of the worst defects that we have, the real coffee.
Tell me more about that.
So tangent on fermentation. For me, all coffee is fermented. Only if you ferment it in a laboratory and deny, for example, temperature, will you not have fermentation. Because today, the way we harvest coffee, even if we pick manually and re-pick and clean up this coffee before going to fermentation, we're still going to have quite a wide spectrum of, let's call it, degree of maturity. And every time you have subtle differences in maturity, you will also have subtle differences in the finished dried bean. And that reflects on how it roasts. So if you want to have a roast where you really, really focus your coffee, it's almost like you're sharpening a knife. You're making more impact with what you have. So if you can narrow down the flavor profile in a coffee, you can make it drink almost like a fruit juice, except that it's hot or lukewarm, which is my favorite. Our tongue was made to taste stuff around our body temperature. It's more sensitive to both acidics and to sugars around 38 to 41 degrees Celsius. So it makes sense to drink lukewarm coffee. So the tangent was all these processes that can make coffee turn really, really good through fermentation. If they are not controlled, if they go outside where they produce good flavors, just like making beer or wine as well, you need to control the temperature to have a good idea what your result will be. But since we're doing this with coffee, and we already have coffee that has passed the point, that maybe dried a bit on the bush, that maybe the skin was cracked open by getting too dry, for example, and that opens up the cherry for any kind of infection. And yeast and bacteria are all over coffee. They're all over the leaves, the stems, everything, all the time, because they're airborne. So they're always there. And as soon as you have sugars and water and a certain temperature range, then you're going to have something start happening. So water is one of the ones. If you deny water, you don't have fermentation. So that's one of the reasons why we try to control the drying, to make the fermentation stop at a certain point. We can, for example, retard drying in a certain point and make the coffee ferment a bit more, but for example, slowly with a controlled temperature. But what is common is that you ferment a large body of very diverse cherries, where you have some green, you have some stuff that already passed, you have some underripes, and you have ripes all mixed together. And when you start fermenting something like this, the ones that have already maybe over fermented on the tree or during the process of picking and getting to where the coffee needs to dry, these are already entering into maybe an advanced stage of fermentation. And when it goes too far, it becomes acidic, and you start having the fruit actually rot. And
which is the old school naturals, right?
Which is the old school naturals that drink so marvelously until they bang a hammer into your forehead.
Oh, I remember those days. Having been in the coffee industry.
Coffee like that is quite common to find still. in the regions that have more rain during the harvest season, or in
Yeah.
years where the conditions aren't quite as good and the weather's kind of sketchy, you see a lot more of these coffees. And many
Mm.
areas in Brazil, you can only dry coffee if you actually have greenhouses for drying. There's just no way of making quality coffee without it. You need to be in a covered area because there's just way too much rain.
Right. So is what you're saying that there's a disconnect between what the consuming end of the market wants and what producers ideally would like to produce?
Mm-hmm. I
That's what you're
think,
saying?
oh, I just got told that my internet's a bit unstable here, but that's fine. We'll just push on. I think that if those who buy coffee
Mm-hmm.
articulate a bit more and are more willing to cooperate and work together with farmers. Now, this is usually the older, the bigger, the successful roasteries around the world are doing this because they have the financial stability to be able to do it. Because it's not that simple,
Mm-hmm.
and some white guy from Norway shouldn't come down here and mess too much as well, right? It can be problematic. The good thing in
For those
Brazil
just
is,
listening, he raised his hand. The
yeah, I raised
vast
my hand.
majority of the people who engage with this podcast listen and not watch. So we're going to have to every now and then give those little verbal cues of the visuals that are going on. Go ahead.
Now, where was I?
You shouldn't
No.
be advising.
Ah, yes, yes. So, when we ask for things that don't exist, we need to
Yeah.
try to formulate a bit better what we're asking for. For example, I would
Mm-hmm.
like to avoid coffees that go into acidic fermentations because it's a marker that makes most people feel unwell drinking the coffee, whether they are aware of it or not. So, that could be.
Explain that if you wouldn't mind.
So,
Unwell.
acetic acid is basically vinegar.
Mm-hmm.
And vinegar is something that is produced naturally where there are sugars when the maturity goes to overripe and overripe starts rotting. Then you start having this occurring naturally in fruits, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So our body knows that when you have acetic acid in the mouth, you should be careful and maybe you shouldn't eat that much because it's something that's already passing. It can give you intestinal problems, whatever, gas,
Mm-hmm.
whatever your worst nightmare is with food poisoning or whatever. So it's a marker that the human body knows that this is not good. So whenever you have acetic acid in something, you can't possibly create the same feeling of well-being drinking that coffee, which could be unconscious, but it
Mm-hmm.
certainly doesn't hurt. So I'm saying that, even people who don't know how to drink coffee, even people who are not cuppers, if they pay attention to their body and they do some short trainings with fruits, for example, to see how bananas are a fantastic way to do this because they don't have too much acidity in them, but the
Mm-hmm.
acidity they do have when they get ripe and nice is quite fantastic. And when you go from really green,
Mm-hmm.
something that your body just does not accept, no matter what, your mouth gets completely dry. There's no salivation going on, and there's no way you would like to actually chew and eat this because you're going to get sick. When you try one that's a little bit more ripe, you start recognizing the flavor, not just that dry magnesium flavor in your mouth, whatever. Um, and you start seeing the rise of the sugars and how this really enhances everything and how the sugars kind of develop together with the rest of the sensory profile. And when it starts getting really interesting is when acidity starts appearing, because it's a slightly different process that produces this in most fruits. Acidity is usually produced at night when the plant enters or does not do photosynthesis and burns the sugars created during the day. So you need to get sweet first, and then when it gets more acidic, it means it's actually ready to seed and ready to be eaten. So this is something that's in all of us. And we also
Mm.
recognize this acetic acid, which is something that's already gone past its point. It's not that good for us to eat anymore. So whether you like coffee or not, whether you know how to drink coffee or not, whether you're a cupper or not, or whether you're a good cupper or not, you can still recognize what your body's telling you. And this is something that's universal. Yes, I have a good tolerance for acetic acid in coffee because I've had so much of it over the years. I love naturals. You know how it is. Call myself an acid junkie within the coffee community. I like acids. I like my Kenyans, and I like tasting Brazilian coffee that drinks like Kenyan coffee, which is really awesome.
That sounds as kind of the juxtaposition that comes with most coffee people. So I feel like I'm in good company there because I'm the same kind of person that likes to drink this but tastes a little bit like that. So the thing that I wanted to raise with what you were just talking about with regards to producers and the disconnect between the two different ends of the consuming end is that, as you were just talking about acids and the way that we drink coffee, I think of the consumer, and I think of how the relationship that the producer has with the consumer is disconnected, and the relationship that the roaster has, particularly with most smallholder roasters, there's a disconnect between the roaster and the producer. And it seems like even though the supply chain happens, there's a lot of disconnection that happens. And that carries even further when I hear you talking about the way that we should be thinking about the relationship between acetic acid and coffee and our gut health and our microbiome. And I think of what I hear most coffee consumers, the average coffee consumer, say, and they're just like, give me my fucking cappuccino with 2 sugars.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to think about acetic acid. Why would I think about acetic acid? There's a lot of disconnect in our value chain.
Yes, but good coffee isn't that difficult. Today, we really know how to make the extraction part happen. We're really good at roasting, and we have really good equipment today. Of course, I dream of much better stuff than we have to do things that are impossible today within the controls we have. But on the producer side, there's a big problem because it's much more complex. It's much more than one person can learn in a lifetime. To do this the real way and not the simple and I think it's almost like a shortcut when it comes to conventional farming. You just follow the recipe and it works. The problem is that it's not sustainable. When you work the land, you should help the land get richer, and you reap the abundance of this from your work. You take your place, you make it even stronger, you make it produce more. Instead of just getting it medicine and more medicine and steroids, more steroids. Yep. It should be an equation that comes out on the positive side, but most agriculture today comes out on the negative side. You need to put in so many resources, and such the problems we have with the diseases and whatever is attacking coffee. It doesn't need to be like this. It's like this because we're doing something wrong, and we're doing something wrong because we're working within a system where we're not seeing its real complexity. Things don't make sense. Why can't I make the same coffee year after year? It's like people say to me, I've given up. It seems like whatever I do, no matter what I do, it doesn't work. And whenever I think I have the solution and I apply that solution to something, the result is completely different. And why it's like this? It's like this because we're not looking at it at a decent level of complexity.
And I got to shout out a mutual friend of ours at this point, Faf Coffees. Felipe posted the other day about the game cameras. I don't know if you saw this on Instagram. Did you see the pictures that he posted of the animals that they found with the game cameras that they have placed around the farm? And
maybe
contact him and get him to send them to you. 20 years they have been organically farming Faf Coffees, and they wanted to see what had returned to the farm. And they found pumas, they found all kinds of really exotic animals that were there before they were using toxic chemicals many, many, many years ago. As most producers have to do in order to get rid of a lot of the bugs and et cetera, that can be prohibitive to growing crops. And they haven't done things that way. They've done things organically for 20 years now. That was his mother's decision. And to be able to now capture a lot of the really exotic kind of and cool, really, really cool wildlife that returns when that happens and reestablishes an ecosystem is just fascinating and really encouraging. There's not a lot that encourages me in the world right now. I'm not a doomsdayer at all.
It's easy to lose our hope in this respect. I need to maintain my hope in humanity. Because I work with people directly all the time. And it's not always that simple.
Bro, you're telling me. I make a living out of having conversations with people and coaching people. My coaching clients are what give me hope for the world, because so many of the conversations that I have really do challenge my perspective of hope for the future. But we're not going to go there today. What I did want to ask you was, when we have this disconnected value chain and we look at the way that consumers are being signaled through the press right now of your coffee's going to go up, back to truth. The price of coffee is going to go up. You should start paying more for your coffee. And we know that we've gone through 3 decades of trying to get the public to understand that producers aren't getting paid enough. And the margins are getting thinner and thinner and thinner for everybody along the supply chain. How does that conversation, you being on the producing end, are you hearing the kinds of conversations that are going on about this real bull run that producers are experiencing with regards to the coffee prices? What's the tone around all of that and the producing end in Brazil?
Well, first off, I hope the coffee prices stay high, because why
this
on
isn't
earth
even
should
really
they go
high,
back
is it?
down again? No, it's not high. We are seeing, I'm not going to do currency conversion right now because the example is good enough on its own, but any coffee that's decent enough to go, up to 80 points will sell easily for 1,200 to 1,400 reais, which is the currency here in Brazil. And the same coffee a year ago had trouble hitting 600. So you can imagine what's happened to our, a big part of the specialty market is what I call the oops market, coffee made by chance, because there's not that much control out there. So, all the producers who are not very, very actively producing high quality coffees, the ones who are producing them more by chance, all these coffees are kind of I think they're going to disappear from the market this year, because the prices for any coffee whatsoever that's decent, it's so high at the moment, and people are selling as fast as they can. And the harvest has ended in most of Brazil. This year it was a bit shorter than usual, because in a few places it stretches up until even the end of December. I have a friend that picks up to the 19th, 20th of December sometimes. Wow.
He just hates Christmas?
You gotta do what you gotta do.
You gotta do what you gotta do. The life of a farmer.
At least he's not up 4:30 in the morning milking the cows anymore.
Yeah, right. When you say producing coffee by chance, I'm starting to get the sense so far in this conversation that producers are producing coffee the way that they think it should be produced, and we on the consuming end seem to think that producers are producing based on some sort of scientific understanding of the way that it's supposed to be drunk. Is that right?
I think that's pretty much. I think you hit the nail right on the head. Of course, there are many exceptions. There are many strong
Mm-hmm.
professionals working post-harvesting and fermenting all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Most countries have some really good specialists, and I've had really good fermented coffee from all over the world. Like I said, I think all coffee is fermented, so why shouldn't we guide it and try to
Mm-hmm.
control it, or at least guide it if you can't control it? I would hope that whatever problem they have in Rwanda and Burundi will be solved soon, so we can get rid of the potato defect and have all those fantastic flavor profiles that they
Yeah.
have available. I mean, it's just incredible what you can have from a coffee from those areas. But you can have coffees like that from Brazil as well. Now, Burundi and Rwanda are a bit difficult, but having stuff that tastes like a Kenyan, for example, or an Ethiopian,
Mm-hmm.
I've already had a few times here. So it depends on the processes you apply and what kind of genetics you work with.
Mm-hmm.
But back to this disconnect, we're sliding away from the disconnect all the time. I think the disconnect is the fact that nobody really knows what they're talking about. We're all pretenders. And
Don't
this
get me
applies to
started on that
roasters,
subject.
it applies to baristas, it applies to everyone. Human beings are strange because a large part of the success we have comes from our ability to copy without questioning. And that's how we learn complex things, and that's how we study
Come
and go
on
to
now, in the
school.
coffee industry?
There's not a single coffee professional in the world because they're all from other industries.
Oh, I'm such a cynic about this subject. I'm
I'm a master roaster.
Don't get me started. It's not going to end well if I start on this subject. It's just, when we talk about things like good coffee, I'm always challenging people to explain to me what they mean about good coffee. And people hate me a lot of the time when I ask these questions because they don't know how to answer those questions. And to my mind, a coffee professional should be able to explain to me or to anybody that asks them what their definition of a good coffee is. There isn't a definition of good coffee.
No.
But tell me what your definition, if Mr. Barista or Miss Roaster or whatever, tell me what your definition of a good coffee is. And that's usually the question that undoes people who think that they're coffee professionals.
I think I'll simplify that one down to its extreme and say that a good coffee to me is something that makes my human experience fantastic.
But you used another subjective word there, which is fantastic. So what does that mean?
Okay, so a big sense of well-being in regards to my tongue, my nose, how my body feels, like everything, the whole shebang. I want this wonderful experience
you
where
enjoy it.
I absolutely love coffee. Love is a good word.
Right. Still subjective, but we're going to give you a pass on that because I can get quite deep into this. But a good coffee for you sounds like it's just whatever you find enjoyable, whatever you love at the time.
But as I said before, most of these things are quite universal, at least within human beings, the way we react and what kind of flavors that we grow up with and taste. Now, we might not have the same fruit references, but we all have the same reference to eating fruits, and they can be more acidic, and they can be sweeter, they can be different colors, and it all affects how we receive them as an experience. But these experiences, they're not that different from person to person. We're more alike than many people think. And if they get down to that level, maybe they would fight less. I don't know.
I feel that there's two layers of the conversation that's going on, which is so very valid right now. In that, excuse me, in that we're talking about the idea of truth and how truth is perceived. And we're equating that to the other layer of the conversation, which is right now the coffee industry seems to be getting quite exposed for the lack of, exploration into defining its own truth?
I'm not sure that defining the truth is that
Its own truth.
necessary.
You don't think?
Um,
You don't think the producers would find it more valuable if we could all agree on what specialty coffee meant?
yes,
You
consensus
don't think?
help.
Right. Definitions are important because they offer us an opportunity to all conspire in the same direction. They help us understand who our market is and who our market is not. They help when I understand what you define as good, when I understand what the city of Sydney as a coffee consuming culture likes, I know what products are going to work here and what products are not going to work here.
Mm-hmm.
I also understand that if I introduce a pumpkin spice latte into Sydney, it's not going to work. But yet in the US, in California where I was living, I have seen businesses go out of business because they didn't offer pumpkin spice lattes during the fall. Right? So having these kinds of definitions really helps an industry align. It doesn't mean that they have to be strict. It means that there needs to be a common understanding. And the base fundamental one that has really pissed me off since the beginning of my career in coffee is that we could never agree that everyone's allowed to have their own definition of what good means.
That is true. That is true.
We look to this hero worshipping of somebody else is going to tell me what I should like and what I shouldn't like. And if this person who's like a world barista champion or who is like has a famous YouTube channel, this person is going to tell me what I should like and what I shouldn't like. Whereas shouldn't we finally embrace the idea that there are things in my gut microbiome and my genetic makeup and my mood that define what I define as good, as well as my experience and my understanding of sensory experiences. And that's okay. But the coffee industry moves so quickly. I remember the days when we used to have like the tiniest pours of double ristrettos. And at the time, if you weren't drinking like 11 drops of a double ristretto, you just weren't cool, man. Mm-hmm. And now we're pulling shots that are, 40 grams. And people are like, a double ristretto, that's so old school. Right?
It's a bit about education. When you're working during the early ages of an industry, you tend to have more success using more coffee. And as the industry evolves, you're able to make bigger shots, utilizing your coffee in a better way with better roasts and better raw materials, and everything gets better. It's just that, we still, even though coffee is really, really good today, and if you go to the best coffee places, you probably will have a really delicious coffee. Coffee is getting to the level right now. What I'm seeing from industry professionals that I like to keep an eye on and an ear to what they're saying in relationship to extraction, in relationship to roasting. What I'm seeing is that we're almost getting to the point where we're ready to do this level up act, where coffee becomes so much more than it is today, where the experience for the consumer is much richer, much better. I'm not saying that I found the only way, but I found a way of doing coffee that makes it a very, very different experience. And the coffee can actually drink more like juice because you're not taking so much out of it along the way, both in roasting and extraction and everything else. And I think this is something that can happen within the next 10 to 20 years, that we're starting to see a new movement coming in globally, where we actually get really good control of our extractions and our roasts, and we can take coffee up another 20-30% maybe. Because in general, even where you have good coffee and good extraction, there are markers in what you drink that says it's not that good. More bitterness than you need, more astringency than you need, a poor definition of sugars or acidity, for example. And these things don't need to happen.
If we then lean in again to the disconnect conversation, do you think that there's a disconnect between excuse me, the disconnect between driving extraction to continue to evolve versus our consumers who are still drinking a cappuccino with 2 sugars?
Mm-hmm. But everyone will benefit from better coffee in all levels. What we're seeing in Brazil now, after 20, 30 years of trying to control fermentation and eradicating fermentation from the coffees, is that yes, our bottom level coffees, all the really, really bad stuff, the quantities have actually gone down quite a lot. And some of the worst areas in Brazil have shown that they have the biggest potential, which is not surprising because where you have lots of sugars and humidity and everything you need, the drive gets stronger. So these problematic areas are often areas that if you clean up your processes, if you work
with agronomists,
disinfecting and actually doing everything the way you need to do it, and try to avoid cross-contamination of lots and all these things, you can make really, really nice coffee. So I think that we're quite far away today from where we can be. We're not going to have that much happen on the picking side yet, which is one of our biggest challenges today, because you can refine the way coffee acts during drying, during fermentation, during roasting, and during extraction if you have a really, really small window of maturity. Lots of coffee grounds they all roast the same way because they all grew the same way. So you don't have these big differences. A lot of coffee turns out being not that sweet and not that punchy and not that clear in their flavor message, because there are lots of coffee beans that don't take to the roast. They're slower to roast. They're slower to absorb the heat from the roaster. And they just don't get there. So they don't release their full potential. And they end up tasting bad because of this. So
and
just
is that because...
being able to...
Go ahead.
No, please go ahead. So this is because when you have different levels of maturity, you have different levels of, let's not be simplistic and call it density, but the cellular structure and everything that the grain saves up for future processes, remembering that coffee needs to be alive to give you a good roast. It can't be something that died half a year ago. It's going to taste horrible, like most things that died half a year ago. So you need to have a coffee bean that evolved well, that grew big, grew strong, and has lots of resources for falling on the ground, being eaten, excreted, dried, getting some rain, and then starting a new cycle. That's what it wants to do. And we're just tagging along for the ride.
Just to give people a visual reference of what Eystein was saying, there are a lot of people that listen to this podcast that don't quite understand the way that coffee is picked. So if you have seen cherries on a tree, all the cherries don't mature at the same rate. You'll notice that through the color that you see. There's some green cherries, there's some yellowish kind or orangish kind of cherries, and then there's some beautifully dark red cherries. They're all at different maturity levels. And so if all of those at the different stages of development are picked at the same time and are included in the same batch of roasting after they've gone through processing, you can't expect that there's going to be any uniformity in the way that coffee is going to be tasting. Versus if you've got people going through hand picking and only picking the mature cherries and then going through on another pass sometime later and picking the newly fully matured cherries. You've got, and this is what leans into the idea of specialty coffee. It's more labor intensive because you're paying more attention to only including or only picking more mature cherries and then having a more diligent processing process, for lack of a better term. But this is what Eystein's talking about. Am I correct there?
Yes. So this goes bad in many, many ways. That's where one of the big problems in coffee today lie, because as soon as you remove the fruit from the tree, you start some kind of process of degradation. It doesn't receive that influx of energy and nutrition anymore, so it's on its own, and it starts getting ready for another cycle. And if you have, for example, green coffee drying together with mature coffee, what happens is that the green coffee will sabotage what's happening with the mature coffee, and the mature coffee will sabotage what's happening with the green coffee. So on their own, if you, well, have you ever, I don't remember which fruits they are, but if you put like a banana next to an orange, the orange goes bad really fast.
Right. One ripens. It's
yes,
ethylene. It's the gas is ethylene that
exactly.
the
Thank you
banana
for
releases.
reminding me. So it's a process that's very similar, and basically you can't have the two together for any time at all, because you just lose potential all the time. And I can taste any lot in any coffee if it was dried with green first and then the green was separated out later by any kind of process. Quite common to hand pick your coffee here in Brazil, because it's not that available, the technology, and it's quite expensive. So most small farms that offer really good coffee, they've all been hand sorted on the family table. So just to give a small look at the reality. And the bigger producers, they do what they do. They have their solutions. But most co-ops, for example, have electronic sorters, but they don't do perfect work, and they can't undo the damage that was done at the beginning by not having this segregation. So.
Right. And so right now, given the price of coffee is so high, and we were talking about this on the podcast last year, the idea that as the price of coffee goes up on the C market, people may sacrifice selling their coffee to specialty markets because they're getting the same prices on the C market as they would have otherwise gotten on specialty markets.
It's actually a bit worse than that, because if you look at the specialty producers here in Brazil that are the leaders, that are the innovators, they're driving the community forward, they're mostly small and they're not able to export. So they're making coffee for Brazil. They're making coffee for a market that has almost 2 years of our current reality with COVID and
challenges.
Everything else. So we're in a market where, yes, specialty coffee went up a lot in the internal market, but maybe not quite as much as the commodity. So maybe prices went from 1,000 to 2,000, almost a doubling in some cases. But that's more for the lower market specialty coffees that could be included into something more common, or could be upgraded into specialty with good cleaning, for example. And then you have the top grade, which became a lot more expensive this year. You can pay 3,000-4,000 for a bag, and the economy just doesn't permit that today for most roasters. So the specialty coffee here will have a bit of a difficult time selling their coffees this year, because the market just can't pay what they actually need to be paid for these coffees in this market. But those who are producing commodity are happy. Of course, many of them are in areas that were affected really badly by frost and everything else. You've talked about this earlier on the podcast. So it's going to be interesting to see how next year will be for us. Economically difficult this year, economically difficult last year, smaller harvests, lots of damage. But the only real way to go forward from this is specializing. And specializing means studying, and studying is always good. But in the end, we also have to make it real. So we need to make some changes. So I think we need to find a way to help all these small producers become specialists. And to work in coffee, you need to be multi. You need to do a lot of stuff.
How plausible do you think that is? Because I mean, it would be awesome if we could get all the producers the education and the insight that is required to make that happen. But how plausible is that in a market where commodity is doing really well and it's just easier for them to not put the attention into specialty that's required right now?
I think we're looking at a human defect here, because look at how many years Scott Rao has been posting curves on the internet, and how most roasting curves, if you start looking at how people roast their coffees, have nothing to do with what he teaches, and it's all there for free. It's just a matter of playing catch up. That's all we need to do with roasting. There's not that much more to explore at the level that we're at. But still, people are not doing it. They're not studying. They're not accepting it. They're not there. So maybe it's just part of who we are.
As an industry or as a people, do you think?
As a species.
So what it sounds like you're saying is, very seriously, what it sounds like you're saying is that the innovation, and I don't like using that word in coffee because there's very, very little true innovation that happens in our industry. The new ideas or the developments, I guess, are a better way of looking at things. Not a lot of them are actually factual. They're just new ideas.
I think I blew off on a tangent earlier when I said something similar. I fell off my track.
No worries, but you'll remember it. But this idea that what I think you're saying is everything we really need to know about coffee so far, we've already gotten there.
The global knowledge
is there. What needs to happen now is we need to chill for a second and focus on making sure that information isn't at the tippy top. We need to invest.
You bring it down to the base.
We need to invest in making that accessible to everyone. And I think that the key behind making it accessible to everybody is this unified understanding of, and I'm going to say something kind of controversial here, this unified understanding that we're all headed in a similar direction, which is we are not team coffee. We're not team specialty coffee. We're not trying to conspire to the idea that we need. I mean, we wax poetic about it all the fucking time, but we do not actually look to meaningful ways as a group of people to strengthen the supply chain and the value chain.
No, but that's common. If you look anywhere, this is common. I mean, I think I found my little tangent. Human beings are lazy. We are built, inherited this ability to copy complex systems. That's how we study today. That's how humanity became who we are today. So we are good at copying, and we're terrible at critical thought. So that's what's missing.
In our industry, the way that I would like to demonstrate what you've just said is that a lot of people like the idea of owning a cafe.
It's the dream.
They like the idea of hanging with people while you're making a coffee for them, or they love the idea of putting their headphones on while they roast coffee all day. They really love the idea of baking muffins for customers. They really enjoy the idea of seeing their customers sitting at tables and people perhaps meeting their future husband or their future wife or whatever. People love the idea of owning a cafe. I coach a lot of people in business development.
Thanks Santa Claus for that. Because if not, we wouldn't have it. Thanks Santa Claus for that, because if not, we wouldn't have an industry.
Right. And the heartbreak and the anger that I see in people when I start to break down exactly what's required. to do this in real life is astonishing. You know, there's this, whenever a new one-on-one client joins the Map It Forward fold, there's this one sheet of everything that's required to start a business. And it's one sheet. And my clients have affectionately termed it the fuck you list. Because and you would think I was the one that called it that. No. It wasn't me. I call it the business startup checklist. This is everything that you need to do to start a business in coffee. And most people look at it and say, fuck you. There's nobody that would look at this list. Exactly. There's nobody that would look at this list and want to start a business after this. But the reality of it is that's how it goes for everybody. Unfortunately, in our industry, we have this delightful kind of Santa Claus vision of how rosy everything is for people who own cafes and roasteries, and how cool is it that I can have my roastery and bag everything up. I'm an introvert, so I don't ever have to deal with customers or people. I can just spend all my day with my roaster and my bagging bench and just do it all and never have to speak to anybody. Except you've got to sell that coffee, and you've got to market that coffee, and you've got to understand how to have a clear understanding of profit and loss statements and what a balance sheet looks like, and you've got to create a customer acquisition plan and all of that kind of stuff. Otherwise, you're going to invest all of that money for nothing. And we don't sell the reality of the dream. We just sell the dream in this industry. And I think what's coming for us over the next couple of years across the entire value chain is that the kicking the can down the road of that reality, the road's going to come to an end. After pandemics and inflation and economic collapse and all of that kind of interesting stuff that we're starting to get into the thick of right now, I think that the pressure of all of that, and, you know, next year Trump starts campaigning for 2024. So that's a whole other level of all of that shit that's going to create more havoc. I think that a lot of people, and we're seeing it here with cafes saying in Sydney now with this new Omicron variant. I really struggle to say that correctly. I've heard a lot of people say it different ways. I think I'm saying it right. The Omicron variant.
I think you got it.
Thank you, sir. If we, after having had 20 weeks of shutdown here in Sydney, hard lockdown, and Melbourne had it much, much worse, if our government decides to shut down again, our cafes won't survive. Our roasteries are either going to do really, really well, or they won't survive either. There's a lot of hurt going on in our industry right now. And unfortunately, what I think is happening is these are legacy issues that are just exposing themselves now. They're not issues that are being raised. These are not new issues. These are issues that you covered up from buying cheap coffee from producers, the race down to the bottom where you didn't think it was necessary to pay an adequate price for the coffee, or you didn't think it was necessary to pay adequate wages, all of this kind of stuff. Now, the end of the value chain is getting squeezed and squeezed hard. And I think now all of these issues are exposed, all the warts are getting exposed. And I think we're in for a very interesting next 2 years that will have a flow-on effect back through the value chain. Because if we're going to see mass closures of cafes, which is what I anticipate, where is the flow of the green coffee going to go?
Well, from what we've seen around the world and what I've seen here in Brazil, the people who know how to do business and how to do coffee, many of them have survived, not all of them. People who are really bad at business in general have not survived, and there are many of them, because in coffee we're all dreamers, and the math is not the strong side, it seems. And what I've seen is that some people who had an organized business with a decent logistics and everything else, they've actually managed to grow quite a bit during the pandemic. But
Awesome.
lots of change, lots of adaptation. I mean, I've practically gone a year and a half without working. That doesn't mean I've not been working, because I have my life work to do. It just means I'm not getting paid, which is difficult
You're
at
on
times. And
sabbatical.
you can say that, with sporadic vacations going to work.
Yes. Yeah, everything seems to be flipped the other way at the moment, doesn't it?
But that doesn't mean that the work stops. That doesn't mean that I don't have anything to do, because even if I'm not selling, for example, sensory analysis of coffees, which is something that I do a little bit, not that much, but I'm the second or third opinion for a lot of farmers for exports and for cleaning up processes and these things. So a lot of people send me coffee during the harvest, for example, for getting help on tuning their processes. So that's one of the interesting parts of my work. That work is usually done on site, but now we're 2 years into non-on site, which is a bit different. And you can actually do a lot less. You can do all the basics, and you can actually do some more intricate stuff as well, but some things just need to be hands-on. And there are many things that you can't pass along in the same way when you're not there in person. For example, I can teach a farmer how to smell his fermentation, how to take the temperature of the mass and understand what this means for the coffee. Time to move on to the next stage, another 2 or 3 hours here, depending on the temperature of the day, how much wind. And there's coffee should be a whole chain of choices. And today it isn't, but we can actually guide the coffees. We can make something really, really, really good. Something to please anyone, something to make coffee the universal beverage. Of course, it's never going to beat water. But maybe it'll be like tea, making water even better.
I want to ask you, and I apologize in advance to anyone who's sick of hearing me ask this question, but I really think it's important, and I'm going to keep asking it to people. I have the deeper and deeper I get into the industry, and I'm, around 20 years now, the more I come to realize that we have a branding problem in coffee. We use the word coffee for too many things. Instant coffee is coffee. Roasted coffee is coffee. Espresso is coffee. A latte is coffee. Batch brew is coffee. Also, a coffee that costs $25 a cup is coffee, and a coffee that costs 99 cents a cup is coffee.
And so are the leaves and the cherries and the whole bush and
it's
the
all
roots,
coffee.
It's all coffee.
So no wonder the consumer's confused by why the hell we're asking them to pay $6, $7, $8 a cup for a latte when 7-Eleven's selling it for 99 cents and they're calling it specialty coffee as well. What are your thoughts on that idea? Do you agree?
I think that if you want to do special, you need to do special. I don't think just running half the mile will help. You really need to push your boundaries doing this, because that's the only way that you're going to be really happy, really productive. That's the way you're going to move forward faster. You're going to learn faster. Be what you do and love what you do. Find your drive and do specialty, however you define it. If it's coffee that pays the producer better, or coffee that links the end consumer with the producer, or whatever your angle is, something to help the industry grow and to be stronger. And the base of all this is human interaction. Coffee is made by people for people, and you can't take the human out of the equation. So I think we should choose to focus more on the people and focus more on the communication. And if we could agree on what good coffee is, maybe we could start making it.
Do we need to agree?
No, I don't think we need to agree. Like I said before, there are some universal truths just from being human and what we like. I mean, all people don't like the same things. There are some fruits here in Brazil that I just can't stand, and it's a genetical question. Some people have it and some people don't. There are a few
Hmm.
examples of that around the world. But other than a few things like that, we're all pretty similar in the way we experience things, though we can't seem to agree on much of anything. So there's a dilemma.
Yeah, I mean, the more that they do research into the way that your microbiome affects the way that you taste and the mood that you have and the way
Hmm.
that the way that your microbiome and your genetics interact with each other, all of these things really do influence the way that you experience everything and the way that you
Hmm.
tolerate things, whether you can tolerate certain acids and what stage of life you're in and how your environment. I mean, I know from as being somebody who moved from Australia to America and to the UK and back to Australia and back to America a number of times, my microbiome really shifted the way that I taste different things based on my cultural palate in those different countries.
Interesting.
And I noticed that the way that I experience different cruciferous vegetables, so broccoli and cabbage and all those kinds of things, really affect my hormonal structure in a different way based on the way that they're grown in different countries. And so, but I'm a hyper, like, food conscious person and I'm very aware of my body. And
Hmm.
so, in order to be able to track that kind of thing, it requires the investment of time and the investment of choices and the investment of an intention. And I think a lot of people get into our industry for the romantics of coffee. Just like most people get into business in the coffee industry for the romantics of being in business or the
But if you want
romantics
to
of
do
coffee.
something real, you have to go all in. You have to live what you do. You have to love what you do,
Right.
whatever the definition is. And that way you'll do your best work and maybe you'll find your balance. And that's one of the things that the pandemic has told or taught a lot of people is that no, everyday life didn't have to be that way. Maybe I can work from home. Maybe I am more productive without a boss. Maybe some days I work 5 o'clock in the morning, other days I work 4 o'clock in the afternoon because that's what my travel rhythm set me
Mm-hmm.
up with for functioning at the moment, and that's how it works. Just be more open, be more uh, tolerate yourself more, be nicer to yourself. And I think that, for example, if you want to sharpen your instrument and think that your instrument is your body, it makes sense to eat well. Because if you only eat fast food, how is your body going to work at a decent level? It's not about calories; it's about a lot more than just calories.
And I wonder if there is a messaging when we look at this idea that there's a branding problem in coffee. If we go back to disconnects, there is an opportunity for us to signal the wellness element of coffee as a way to separate out what specialty coffee does, as
Hmm.
opposed to the other parts of the industry that focus on the kind of coffee for instant coffee and the kind of coffee for, the commodity grade kinds of coffee versus what specialty coffee really offers for people. So it's not a perspective of being like these people who we think that, we're super better than everybody else, etc., etc. That's not what we are saying. What we're saying is that there could perhaps be an opportunity to offer a different perspective that consumers could lean into. Just something to think about, I guess.
Mhm. But I think
Um,
if we go back to your comment about all this not being real, we're living dreams, we're disconnected from what is real, what is coffee.
mhm.
So we need to look at this thing. We need to brand ourselves, find our identity, and I think we could do this through the beverage. I think that good coffee getting out to people and good coffee becoming more mainstream because we know how to produce, we know how to do this. We need to get this information out. I don't think this is too far into the future. The coffee can stand on its own two legs and be sustainable.
So is your idea to get this information, these courses that you're working on, is the idea that
yeah,
okay.
sorry. I
All
jump
right.
ahead.
So you have a plan to get these out there?
I have a plan. So what I've been talking about today, I said I've been sitting down for the last while, writing some new courses and finding new direction, finding new ways to give this information to the people who need it, and finding the angles to get to the different people in the chain that I need to get to. But I think on a bigger scale, we're definitely ready to get there. But it's going to take time. We're going to need big money in this. We're going to need big institutions in this. We're going to need to find people who believe in education as a goal. But I mean, look at Norway as an example. We are where we are today because schooling became general law really, really early, and it really helps society. I mean, information is good, knowledge is even better. And if we're lucky, maybe we'll have something on top called, what's that called again? I'm not old enough to have too much of that yet.
What? Like the pension?
No, above knowledge.
Like
about
wisdom?
Yes, thank you. Maybe if we're lucky.
I'm a long way from being wise. I think our industry is at a kind of precipice, if I'm honest, and I don't know the direction that our precipice will go. I think that our industry has the opportunity to look at all the moving pieces right now and make a decision of, well, first of all, who is our leading governing body? How are we getting signaled the direction that we want to move in as an industry? Because it's not SCA. SCA is not a governing body of anything. SCA is a trade organization. They set up trade shows and they bring people together. That's what SCA does. And for all intents and purposes, we don't have a governing body that kind of helps us as an industry come together to determine the direction that we want to drive the industry. The other thing we don't have is a shared mission of where we want to end up and how we can work together to make that happen. We've got a lot of ideas, but all those ideas are based on individual people's agendas or individual business agendas. And until we can decide that we want to make sure that people get paid fairly for what they contribute based on the product and supply and demand economics, right? If you're producing something that people don't want, you shouldn't get paid for it just because you're producing it. But if you are producing something that people want and people are buying it, you should get paid adequately for producing it. And that's not happening. Well, it's starting to happen right now, but that's because of an external factor that producers didn't have a say in. The sea market is being affected, going back to truth, in inverted commas, it's being affected by speculators on the sea market. Right now, there's a lot of people that are reading Bloomberg articles. There's a lot of people that are reading the Financial Times, and they're saying there's a supply problem in Brazil, and Brazil's the largest producer of coffee in the world. Oh shit, I'm going to go and buy coffee futures. And I'm going to wait. That's what's driving. All this speculation is what's driving the market in the direction that it's going. And it's being influenced by supply and demand economics. But truth be told, the speculators are the ones that are having this wonderful influence to help producers get more money. But we need to be more intentional about the way that we affect the money that producers are earning. We shouldn't be setting this kind of idea that it's the speculators who are helping the producers out when they don't even know who the fuck they are. And yet we as an industry are all about, oh, we love people and we want community and community and community and oh, community. What?
What community? This notion of the community brings the social aspect to people in the industry. They can feel like they're part of something. That has a positive side, but I'm not sure it's real.
That's
it's comforting.
Right. And the reason that people don't like me is because I'm not about the not real. Like, it's not that people don't like me, it's that I think I challenge people far too much with the real talk. And I would like our industry to stop getting hard-ons from latte art throwdowns. And I would rather see us have real conversations about the fact that we like the idea of community, but we don't really understand. Man, am I going to cop some shit for the stuff I'm saying today. We don't focus on what we really mean by long-term lasting community. Because if we did, we wouldn't have the major labor shortage that we're experiencing across the world on the consuming end. People wouldn't be saying fuck you to employers because they got minimum wage, they had horrible working conditions, they were working for people who didn't know what they were doing. It's not community. People find solitude in things like latte art throwdowns because they all go there together and they drink and they feel this temporary sense of we're sort of in the same industry together, getting hard-ons from people pouring milk into a cup.
You know, maybe there's a brighter future ahead, because if something has, we've changed as humanity over the last couple of years with so many people in isolation. We have a greater need for the real, as you're saying, real experiences where you're not just reading something beautiful on a packaged coffee, a beautiful story that somebody wrote up and might even be true. But you can actually go there, be there, talk to the producer, have real experiences, whether it's travel or food or coffee, whatever your thing is. We want it real. And that's one of the things we're going to have to look at, because the market wants it.
And I think that's the big hope. Like, despite as people are going to say, wow, Lee's really disillusioned by everything. I'm really not. In actual fact, I'm quite hopeful that this last couple of years has put people in a position where they haven't been able to go to latte art throwdowns. They haven't been able to commune in cafes. They have been forced to reassess the reality of all of their situations. As the great Dave Chappelle puts it, the only hero that I have is Dave Chappelle. And he said, the pandemic has forced everybody to reassess every social contract they have in their life, whether it be the social, sorry?
And maybe reinforce their relationship with coffee as coffee, and not as the barista, not as the cafe.
So what he was saying was social contracts with people, but social contract with the things we do in our life, the things we accept and welcome into our life. So the social contract you have with the job, the social contract you have with your career or your business or the family that you have, all of that is up for reassessment right now. And what we have seen is during that reassessment, a lot of people have said, fuck you to the coffee industry, and have left. Because in the reassessment of that social contract, they realized that they either lied to themselves or they were lied to about what this industry could offer them. And they got really right. Oh, yeah. And I think people are realizing that the return on investment of being in this industry wasn't what they expected. And they were offered a moment of pause that is still going on, where they are saying, I don't think this is for me anymore. And they're choosing a more meaningful definition of community than latte art throwdowns.
Mm-hmm.
And that can't be a terrible thing. Like, I just can't see that as terrible. I see that as exceptionally hopeful, because people are being, not only are they being forced to look at the idea of real, but they're taking action on it. And you don't get more real than that. Whereas before, what I think we were living in this kind of delusion of pretending that we were a community-based industry and living in the bullshit of that.
I believe in potential. So I believe in making coffee's potential bigger, because if coffee's potential is bigger, it can benefit everyone, end consumer, producer, the whole chain. So I don't know. One of the things we could do, which would probably be the easiest way to move everything around if we want to do things differently, is teach people how to taste, teach people how to use what they have and think what they never thought. And I think maybe you could change a person's life with 45 minutes on Netflix, who knows?
Hey, I think that there's so much opportunity out there if we can start listening to each other. If we can start coming together and doing things like this, have conversations with people. Like, you and I don't disagree. Like, we agree on everything that we've spoken about today. It's been a really joyful exploration of each other's minds, from my perspective anyway. It's one of those things where you know, it's a gift to have the opportunity to sit down with people and hear what their ideas are. And I think if we as an industry could pick people that we wouldn't normally have conversations with and be intentional about having those conversations, but really have them with the intention of listening to other people. Like, what are your ideas? People on social media have this, I don't know why they do this to me. They send me posts and ask me for my opinion on why I think this is right or wrong. People need to stop doing that. People need to start making up their own minds about what they think about these posts, and the way that you, or do one better. Contact the person directly and have a conversation with them about what your thoughts are. Invite them to a 15-minute WhatsApp app call and just say, hey, I saw your post. I'd really love to have a discussion with you about it. Don't come to me and ask me to tell you what you should think. Recently, there was an example where somebody sent me this post from a completely different country than what he was in and I was in. And he said, does it upset you that they're asking for somebody under the age of 30 for this barista ad? And I got quite pissed at the idea that I should have to give you my opinion on that, because I don't want to be telling you what my opinion is so that you can formulate your opinion. I want
Critical
you to
thought.
Right. And I think that our industry stands to benefit big time if there is more critical thought conversations that are happening about things like taste and flavor and all of this kind of stuff.
Talk about the real stuff. Talk about what we can agree on. And like I like to say, let the coffee speak.
And give producers a louder voice. Like, listen to the questions that producers have. Start a dialogue between the extremities of our value chain. But I think both ends of it are scared of each other.
Instead of talking points, we can ask, what did you like in my coffee and what did you not like in my coffee?
Right.
What do I think are its strong sides and what would I like to do better next year? And how could I do this? And who knows? If we should do this together and we'll both learn. I think that's a better way of doing things than just talking points, which is ridiculous because points is one place in time with that roast and that coffee, and the coffee changes and that water and that professional, and it'll never happen again in the same way.
Do you have any suggestions for any roasters that are listening in how they might be able to start conversations with producers about these kinds of things?
Find one that speaks your language or learn a new language because it's going to be difficult. It's going to take time. But I think it's really good if people start actually reaching out and trying to have conversations. Remembering that, for example, in Brazil, it's very hard to find producers who will speak English.
Who don't, or who do speak English?
No, who speak English.
Okay.
I know some that do, most don't. We have a difficult situation with English here. In the US and a lot of places around the world, Spanish is also a big language. Spanish doesn't really work that well here. It could work. It'll be slow. It'll be difficult. But language is a big one. But I think just getting together and making things happen. I mean, find somebody local in the coffee industry that is suffering with COVID and have them guide you. It's not that difficult. You can get in here if you can't get home. I'm sorry, Brazil is politically difficult at the moment. But I mean, life is pretty much normal when you get out of the cities. Population density is much less.
Right.
You work. You have the blue sky and the sun above you. You're in fresh air all the time. You know, it's not a biggie. Of course, if you're going to go somewhere, you're going to get tested and just help set people's mind at ease. That's obvious, but other than that, life continues.
Is Brazil open for visitors?
It's a bit difficult at the moment. I think we have 6 African countries that have just been barred, mostly in the southern part of the country, and there's another 3 or 4 on the list that are probably going to be barred soon. But it's all because of the new Omicron or whatever it's called, variety. And who knows where it's from? They just happen to map it there first, and it's probably all over the place. It's not the solution.
So I guess one other option is for people to kind of visit origin countries when they do want to start traveling again, visiting origin countries and going and doing tours like our friend Eystein.
Make it real. Yeah, make it real. Stay in one place for a bit longer, get to know the people. Do your homework first so you can find the right place before you go, and not after you get there or after you've gone home.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Eystein, where can people get in contact with you if they want to find out more about these courses that you're working on?
Well, if they want to get in contact with the professional me, then I think Instagram is probably the best way. So I have a Portuguese name to my company. It's called Terceira Onda, third wave, basically. So it's a third wave coffee Brazil in English. So 3A Onda, ONDA.
We'll include links in the show notes for everybody so that they can. Okay.
And then I have a slightly simpler one, but it's my private one where I can, let some steam off if I need that, or say something if I need that, and it's not all coffee related. And that's called E-Roast, E_roast. It's a bit easier to find.
And we'll have links to all of it in the show notes. So if anyone wants to get in contact with you, they can. This has been a delightful conversation, sir. Thank you so much.
It's been fun. It reminds me of the time before cell phones where we actually focused on what we were saying and what other people were saying.
That feels like it was 100 years ago. 2018 feels like it was 100 years ago. But, I was saying to somebody the other day how fortunate, for those of us who are in our 40s, how fortunate we are to have gone through a phase where we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have computers. Like now I'm definitely dating myself, but, we didn't know what computers were when I was going through, the earlier part of my schooling. It wasn't until I really got into university. Go ahead.
Silence is, you bring city people up to the mountains and they go nuts from the silence.
Wow.
It makes them all nervous. There's something wrong, Yeah. City dwellers are like that, especially here in Brazil. Brazil is a loud country, loud music, lots of parties. People like speaking loud and screaming loud, and you take city folk into the mountains and ask them to sit down and absorb the silence. They get nervous. Something going to kill me? Looking behind them.
Yeah, wow. I've done Vipassana meditation for 10 days. Do that and it'll cure you of any issues that you have around that kind of stuff. It's being silent for 10 days is pretty intense. So
really makes you need to confront yourself. There's no two ways about it.
It's easily the hardest thing I've ever done. Easily. And I've done some hard shit. Being silent for 10 days, it's not the lack of talking that's the problem. It's the being still. So I hear what you're saying about people who aren't used to being still at all, going into an area where it's totally silent and then thinking, oh wait, what am I supposed to do?
It's the second next? Before the cougar strikes. Where is it? All the birds went silent. What's this?
Eystein Oh my God, I thought I was going to get it then. Eystein Veflingstad. It was such a pleasure to have you on the podcast, and I look forward to doing it again with you, sir.
Thank you, Lee. It was a pleasure.
Peace, love, and peanut butter, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day.